Hi, this is Roman at Right Audio. I'm very excited to introduce Anarchia, a tonal aleatoric instrument with rhythmically random long performances on piano, guitars, trumpet, and Irish flute or whistle. Anarchia is designed for creating really interesting, long evolving textures that can range all the way from defined and sparse to very complex and blended. The engine in Anarchia has multiple playheads per note, up to 12 in fact. When you lay out these individual playheads along different sample positions within the samples, this creates layered rhythmically aleatoric textures with natural variations in timing, density and phrasing. This produces a very ensemble-like effect when pressing a single key. The articulations are designed to capitalize on a range of different textural qualities, from very soft and minimal, for example single intermittent notes, to more complex, for example alternating octaves, and ultimately to more detailed and noisy sounds such as buzzing piano strings or scratching on guitar strings or flutters in the trumpet and the flute. Because the timing of the sample performances is off-grid and unpredictable, their textural variations layer up in a really pleasing, organic way. Let's dive right in. Right, when we open up Anarchia, the first thing we see is the home screen. On the home screen, there are the sound source menus for each of the two layers, A and B, a waveform for each of the layers, a central dynamics fader, which is mapped to your mod wheel, and a balance fader, where you can fade from A to B. And there are also a set of navigation controls at the bottom for the different pages. If we look at the sound source menus for a moment, there are two different types of sound sources here. One of them are simple and the other one are combined. So the simple ones have just one type of articulation, one type of sample. The other ones, the combined ones, as the name suggests, have double. So there's two of them mixed together. They are one after the other, so they are in series, in sequence. And what that now allows us to do is to build patches with even more complexity. So you could have two different types of articulations with a random starting point with lots of different playheads, mixing those two articulations together, and that's just in one layer. So if you then have that in both layers, you can have up to 4 different articulations, and that's a very a neat way to get lots of different complex, pleasing sounds in there. The next page we want to look at is the layer settings page. So this is the page you might want to go to if you want to do a lot of tweaking and making your own sounds. This is definitely the main engine of this instrument. The first thing we'll look at is the sample position. So you can have a choice of fixed or random sample position here. Fixed sample position means that we only have one playhead per voice, and it means we can choose the starting point. So it means we can dial in where exactly we want the sample to start, and it might be that we want to repeat it, a particular part of that sample. So something like this, for example. The offset, the sample offset, can be controlled through a knob here or the slider on the sample itself. The next thing to look at is the random setup here. So with a random starting position, you have a choice of between 1 and 12 voices. So one voice would be 3, 6, 9, and 12. Now you'll notice when you listen to this in a stereo setup that the width here is already set to 100%, which means that these samples will be triggered in a random way across the spectrum as the stereo field. We can set that to 0 as well, and everything will be in the center. Not mono, because the recordings, almost all of them stereo recordings, but in the center. Now we have an option here of turning on the octave layers. That's sub-octave and an octave higher. if we dial those in, some of the voices become octaves that are an octave below or an octave higher. That's why we have 1, 3, 6, 9, 12, because you'll have one central octave and then you'll have one below and one above for each set. So 12 voices would mean 4 central voices in the central pitch, 4 voices below, and 4 voices above. And those little faders here, they target the volume for all of those additional octaves. So if we just turn off the top one for now and go with the lower one, there you go, dial it in nicely. Same with the higher octave one. We also have the option to change the master octave here. So it gets quite extreme, up to 3 octaves on each side. Then we have the option here of using filters on the individual layers, so low pass and high pass. And lastly, attack, decay, sustain, release, standard envelope controls. All of this is available for each layer individually, as you can see, left and right. So we've got the same controls on each layer and can make up pretty much individual sounds for each layer and then combine them together. Let's go to the effects section now. Here we've got a number of coloring effects, so effects that give us texture and character, including saturation. So this is a lo-fi effect here. The notch filter. A band pass filter. And mangle tape, which is a saturation type filter. Then on the right we have an EQ section here, which is an attenuating EQ. So if you turn them up, they will attenuate those frequencies. They'll make those frequencies less present. So for example, in the low, this will take out some of the low frequencies. Same with the mids here. That tames some of the mids and the highs as well. The reason for that is because you have so many different voices building up sometimes. In a patch where you have up to 24 voices, 12 per layer, some of the frequencies can start to build up and become a bit burdensome. So rather than having an EQ that adds more, an additional, an additive EQ if you want, this is a subtractive EQ, and it just takes away in the frequencies that are maybe bothersome. So it gives you a chance to course correct if something is a bit too warm, a bit too muddy, and so on. Or maybe if there's too much high frequency detail, you just attenuate that. Lastly, delay, which is tempo synced if you want it. Without and with diffusion, and also a reverb, which is, you can decide on the length here, on the space of the reverb. It's quite small, quite large. Then what we have is an LFO section. Now the LFO section works with all the effects I just mentioned, except for the delay, and also the balance between layer A and B, and the filters that are in each of the layers. So there's lots of stuff we can do here. Let's start with the balance, which is already set up here. Let's choose one of the more kind of regular shapes. So in terms of shapes for the LFO, there is sine, triangle, square, saw, and random. And they all have their uses. Let's start with a sine wave for the balance, maybe a fairly fast speed, Oh, so medium fast speed, let's do that. Now at the moment we're hearing two different piano patches, so let's do something more varied. Guitars maybe, and a combined trumpet patch with similar attack. So it's a simple LFO crossfading between the two. If we do something a bit more like this, more of a depth and a saw wave. So let's go through and try some of the other options. If we go and do some of the filters in the layers, so we could go here and choose to modulate, let's say, the filter in layer A. I'm going to go for something slightly slower, not quite as deep. And then we'll do something similar for layer B. Maybe a high pass filter there, but slower and maybe a different shape, maybe random, and maybe a nice sort of subtle depth. So very quickly, you've got two different aspects here that are quite distinctive. You've got the sine wave up and down on the left layer on the layer A, and the randomized, quite fast jitter on layer B. Let's see if we can add some other interesting things here. So if we want to use, let's say, the notch filter, first of all, we turn that on at the bottom, then we click on the free LFO, on a free LFO, and we pick notch filter here. Let's do for something, go for something maybe reasonably slow. Depth, let's see about depth. Maybe a bit faster. So obviously if we turn up the depth too much on that one, it starts to sound a bit watery, which you might want, you might not want, depending. But I always find subtlety is quite good with these types of filters. Something subtle is nice. And then let's add another one. Let's go for some tape maybe. And change the direction. Make it, not too fast. Okay, so now let's do some spatial stuff with it. So I would say with the reverb, we can add some movement. Maybe let's make that a bit more regular. Maybe a nice kind of sweeping half bar sine wave sort of thing. And then maybe a bit of delay in front of that, something short maybe. So you might listen to this and you might go, it's a bit too much high frequency stuff going on there. Let's just tame that a bit. And maybe some of the mids as well. So that's an example of something you could do with those types of effects. I'm now going to turn off all of these LFOs and simplify the whole sound again. Make sure the filters are neutral. Maybe pick something slightly different now. So let's see if we can play a little bit with the voices. So let's say we have on the left, we have a combined sound source, flute hammers to octaves. On the right, we have a single layer. We have a single sound source, piano felt octave. So let's say if we make one of them a much smaller ensemble size, so 3, let's say, and on the left we go for really big with lots of octaves and full width. So let's make that a bit of a contrast here. Yeah, let's have a look. And maybe let's change the octaves as well. So let's go for a higher left hand layer and a lower right hand layer. Try this actually with guitars, because I think that would work really well with the piano together. So we could even go further and just pick one voice on the right hand side. Or let's try the same approach with other articulations. Just going to take the top octave so down here a little bit. I think that's not helping this particular sound, but I'm just going to reverse these in terms of what octaves they are in. Let's do this. Now we're getting somewhere.
mix is maybe slightly too heavy on the right hand side. So we're really getting a sense of there's lots happening here. It's still not crazy because we haven't got lots of reverb or lots of delay here, but it's a little bit of density on the one hand, and a bit more kind of specific concentrated sounds on the other hand. So we've got a sort of mix of both. We could do we could tone both of them down a little bit, so have just a tiny bit of movement and density on, let's say, the right hand side. There are 3 of them, or maybe 6, and then just 1 on the left hand side, and see what the difference is. Right, so those are a few options you have here. There really is a lot to play with here, so I encourage you, if you want to play around more, to just go in and change some of the settings, change the sound sources, really mix it up. Take the presets as a starting point rather than something you want to just use. Talking of presets, let's have a quick look through what those are. So there are 4 different categories here, pre-programmed for you. So there are evolutions, which is one sound to another. It's either one category to another category, for example, guitar to piano octaves, or trumpet to guitar, or sometimes it's different ensemble sizes. So let's pick one of those, for example, flutes, small to large. It just means we're going from a small flute sound to a large sound. Or if we go from one category to the other, let's go flutes to piano, for example. Then there are pads. There are quite a lot of them here. You want to have a sort of play through them, but then there are pads. They're generally uniform in terms of their overall composition. There's movement and there's some evolutionary aspect to them maybe, but they are generally quite consistent. You could use them as you would any kind of long pads. For example, this one here, guitar pearls. Or this one's nice as well, I think. Shimmering freckles. We've got pulses as well, so things with some movement. For example, some swaying sounds here like this. Or something more pumping. This one here, for example. Then there are some sound design patches which go a little bit further than the usual just naturalistic sounds. So for example, this one. Or one of my favorites, total whim space. If you want to listen to more patches, more presets, do go to the presets walkthrough. You can hear all of them in that particular video.
Thanks for watching. That's all from me for now about Anarchia.